There's a peculiar phenomenon that happens to those who begin to see life clearly. They find themselves increasingly alone, not by choice, but by a natural consequence of awakening. Today I'll reveal why this isolation isn't a punishment, but perhaps the most liberating experience you'll ever encounter. Picture this. You're at a gathering with old friends sitting in the same circle you've sat in countless times before. The conversations flow around familiar topics, complaints about work, gossip about mutual acquaintances, discussions about material achievements. But something has shifted within you. You listen, but you no longer feel the pull to participate in the same way. The words feel hollow, the concerns trivial, and you realize you're watching a play you no longer wish to perform in. This creates an unsettling paradox. The more conscious you become, the more isolated you feel. The deeper your understanding grows, the fewer people seem to understand you. You begin to question, am I becoming cold? Am I losing my humanity? Or is something else happening here? Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon through his theory of individuation, the process of psychological development where one integrates the conscious and unconscious parts of the mind to achieve self-realization. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand not only why awakened individuals often walk alone, but also why this solitude might be the very thing that sets you free. But I warn you, understanding this truth will require you to examine your own need for validation and belonging in ways that might be uncomfortable. Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable people become when you stop seeking their approval? Understanding this discomfort is crucial because it reveals the invisible threads that bind most human relationships. Threads that once seen can never be unseen. When you recognize these patterns, you gain the power to choose authentic connection over hollow validation, but you must be prepared for the loneliness that often accompanies this awareness. Most relationships operate like emotional mirror systems, where people constantly reflect back each other's beliefs, fears, and worldviews. Jung observed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But he also understood that most people use relationships to avoid this uncomfortable self-reflection. Instead, they seek validation for who they already think they are, creating bonds based on mutual confirmation rather than genuine understanding. Consider how many friendships revolve around shared complaints about work, mutual gossip about absent friends, or collective struggles against common enemies. These conversations feel meaningful because they create a sense of solidarity, but remove the need to vent or seek reassurance, and many of these connections suddenly reveal their hollow core. The friendship wasn't built on appreciation for each other's authentic selves, but on a mutual agreement to provide emotional relief. Your body knows this truth even when your mind resists it. Notice the physical sensation when someone doesn't respond to your need for validation, the slight panic that rises in your chest, the tightness that spreads through your shoulders, the almost compulsive urge to explain yourself further or fill the silence with more words. This bodily response reveals how deeply we've been conditioned to seek external confirmation of our worth. Every social group operates on an unspoken psychological contract that members rarely acknowledge consciously. The terms are simple. We will support each other's views, reinforce each other's narratives, and provide distraction from deeper existential questions that might threaten our sense of security. This agreement allows groups to function smoothly, but it comes at the cost of individual authenticity. This pattern reflects what Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological space where groups maintain cohesion through common illusions rather than individual truth. We see this everywhere: office cultures that bond over complaints about management, friend groups that unite around shared judgments of others, families that maintain harmony by avoiding certain topics entirely. The group's stability depends on everyone playing their assigned role in the collective narrative. The moment someone stops participating in this exchange, they disrupt the entire system. They become an anomaly, unsettling not because they intend to be threatening, but because they no longer fit the established structure. Their very presence raises uncomfortable questions. If they don't need our validation, what does that say about our need for theirs? If they can exist peacefully without constant reinforcement, are we perhaps too dependent on external approval? Think of social validation as emotional fast food. It provides immediate satisfaction and temporary fullness, but leaves you hungry for something more substantial shortly after. Just as your body craves real nutrition, even when you fill it with empty calories, your soul yearns for authentic connection, even when you surround yourself with superficial interactions. Try this simple experiment. Next time you're in a group conversation, practice simply listening without offering your opinion or seeking to be heard. Don't withdraw completely, but resist the urge to contribute, agree, or seek acknowledgement. Notice how this changes the entire dynamic. Some people become uncomfortable with your silence. Others may try harder to draw you into the conversation. The group's energy shifts because one person has stopped feeding the validation cycle. As Jung noted, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But here lies the tragedy: most people resist transformation. They prefer the familiar comfort of mutual validation to the uncertain territory of genuine growth. They want relationships that confirm who they already are, not connections that challenge them to become who they might be. When you stop feeding these patterns of mutual validation, relationships that once felt solid begin to feel hollow, not because you've become incapable of connection, but because you've outgrown the illusions that held them together. But this raises a deeper question. What happens to your sense of identity when you no longer define yourself through others' reflections? There's something terrifying about losing the version of yourself that others recognize and approve of. This terror isn't irrational. It's actually a profound psychological shift that threatens the very foundation of how you've learned to exist in the world. Understanding this process is essential because it explains why awakening often feels like loss before it feels like freedom. When you recognize what's happening, you can navigate this transition with courage rather than retreating back into comfortable illusions. The persona, Jung's term for the social mask we wear, becomes so familiar that we mistake it for our authentic self. From childhood, we learn which versions of ourselves receive love, approval, and acceptance. We internalize these patterns so deeply that the mask becomes indistinguishable from our identity. The helpful child, the successful professional, the understanding friend. These roles feel real because we've inhabited them for so long. Like an actor who has performed the same character for decades, eventually forgetting their own name offstage, we become so identified with our social performance that we lose touch with who we are beneath it. The mask wasn't originally meant to replace us, it was meant to protect us. But somewhere along the way, protection became prison and the role became the reality. Your body holds the memory of every mask you've ever worn. Notice how your posture shifts when you enter different social environments, how your shoulders square differently at work than with family, how your voice changes pitch depending on who's listening, how even your breathing patterns alter when you slip into familiar social roles. These physical transformations reveal the deep conditioning that shapes your persona. Jung warned that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This terror intensifies exponentially when your authentic self doesn't match the social image you've carefully cultivated. The gap between who you really are and who others expect you to be creates an internal conflict that many people spend their entire lives avoiding. Consider someone who has built their entire identity around being the helpful one in their family. Their self-worth depends on being needed. Their relationships revolve around solving others' problems, and their sense of purpose comes from sacrificing their own needs for everyone else's. When they begin setting boundaries or saying no to unreasonable demands, the family system rebels not because they're being selfish, but because they're threatening the established order that everyone unconsciously agreed to maintain. This resistance from others triggers our deepest fear of abandonment. We wonder, if I'm not who they expect me to be, will they still love me? If I stop playing my assigned role, will I still belong? These questions force us to confront the painful possibility that some of our relationships were built on our willingness to abandon ourselves rather than genuine appreciation for our authentic nature. The awakened individual doesn't actively rebel against society or dramatically announce their transformation. They simply stop pretending, which is perhaps the most radical act of all. This quiet revolution happens in small moments, the pause before automatically agreeing, the honesty that replaces diplomatic silence, the boundary that gets set without lengthy explanation. Pay attention to moments when you suppress your true thoughts or feelings to maintain social harmony. Notice the internal tension this creates, the way your stomach tightens when you laugh at something that isn't funny, the subtle exhaustion that follows conversations where you've performed rather than participated, the relief you feel when you're finally alone and can drop the act. It's like a fish suddenly questioning the water it swims in. The medium that once felt natural and invisible now feels constraining and artificial. You become aware of currents you never noticed before, pressure you never questioned, and you begin to wonder what it might be like to breathe air instead of water. This process of shedding the social self feels like ending, because in many ways it is the ending of who you thought you needed to be loved and accepted. But what emerges from this ending? What lies beneath the mask when it finally falls away? When the veil of illusion lifts, you don't just see the world differently, you see how desperately others cling to their blindness. This clarity comes with a price that few discuss openly. Understanding why awakening isolates isn't about becoming superior or judgmental. It's about recognizing the fundamental shift in how you perceive reality compared to those around you. This awareness can help you navigate the loneliness with compassion rather than bitterness, and perhaps find genuine connection with others who share this deeper vision. Your presence becomes an uncomfortable mirror that reflects back others' unconscious patterns and unexamined choices. Jung observed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the reverse creates an equally powerful dynamic. When you stop participating in collective illusions, the endless pursuit of status, the addiction to drama, the unconscious consumption of distractions, your very existence challenges others to examine their own patterns. This mirrors the ancient archetype of the truth-teller or prophet, a figure both revered and reviled throughout history. These individuals aren't actively trying to disturb others. They simply embody a different way of being that makes unconscious living more difficult to maintain. Their presence asks uncomfortable questions without speaking a word. Consider how people react when you stop participating in collective complaints or workplace gossip. Your silence isn't judgment, but it often feels like judgment to those still engaged in these patterns. They may interpret your disengagement as superiority or coldness, when in reality you simply no longer find meaning in these exchanges. The discomfort they feel isn't about you, it's about seeing their own unconscious participation reflected back. Awakening creates a language barrier that goes deeper than words. You can still understand the conversations happening around you, but you can no longer speak this language with the same fluency or enthusiasm. It's like learning a new dialect of consciousness while everyone else continues speaking your former native tongue. Notice how your body responds to shallow conversations, now the restlessness that builds during small talk, the urge to redirect discussions toward deeper meaning, the physical discomfort that arises when you're expected to care about things that feel trivial. Your nervous system has recalibrated to seek substance over surface, making superficial interactions genuinely draining rather than merely boring. This creates a communication gap where mutual understanding becomes increasingly difficult. You see patterns they can't see, understand motivations they haven't examined, and recognize the futility of pursuits they're still chasing. Meanwhile, they experience your perspective as confusing, overly complex, or unnecessarily dark. Neither side is wrong. You're simply operating from different levels of awareness. With expanded awareness comes the weight of conscious choice. You can no longer claim ignorance about your patterns, motivations, or the consequences of your actions. Every decision carries the burden of knowing better, and this responsibility extends to your interactions with others. As Jung noted, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Part of this pain involves watching others suffer from illusions you can see through, but cannot fix for them. You witness people making choices that will clearly lead to suffering, staying in relationships that drain them, or perhaps pursuing goals that will ultimately leave them empty. Yet any attempt to share your insights often meets resistance or resentment. Observe your impulse to wake up others or share your hard-won wisdom. Notice how this often creates defensiveness rather than openness. People must discover truth in their own timing, through their own experiences. Your clarity becomes a burden when you feel responsible for helping others see what they're not ready to perceive. The awakened individual faces a profound loneliness that goes beyond lacking companions. You remain physically present in the world, while spiritually inhabiting a different realm of understanding. You attend the same gatherings, work in the same environments, engage in the same basic human activities, yet experience them from an entirely different perspective. This isn't the loneliness of being disliked or rejected. It's the isolation of seeing a movie everyone else is experiencing as reality. You watch people invest enormous energy in pursuits that appear obviously futile, react with intense emotion to situations that seem clearly manageable, and miss opportunities for joy and connection that appear abundantly available. The tragedy isn't that you've become disconnected from humanity, but that humanity often appears disconnected from itself. Your clarity reveals how much unconscious suffering people accept as normal, how many unnecessary complications they create, how often they choose familiar misery over unfamiliar peace. This clarity becomes a form of invisible exile. You remain physically present in the world, but spiritually, you inhabit a different realm of understanding. Yet something profound happens when you stop fighting this isolation and begin to embrace it. What if this solitude isn't a punishment but a passage? What the world perceives as loneliness, the awakened soul recognizes as the most profound form of freedom. This distinction isn't mere semantic comfort. It represents a fundamental shift in how you relate to your own existence. Understanding this transformation can help you navigate the inevitable isolation that comes with awakening without falling into despair or self-pity. When you learn to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, you discover that what others fear as abandonment might actually be your greatest gift to yourself. Jung distinguished between the ego's desperate fear of isolation and the self's natural embrace of solitude. He understood that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. This insight reveals why you can feel profoundly alone in a crowded room while experiencing deep connection in complete solitude. Loneliness is hunger in a room full of plastic food. You're surrounded by what appears to nourish, but find no real sustenance. Every interaction feels hollow. Every conversation skims the surface. Every relationship demands that you shrink parts of yourself to fit. The desperation of loneliness comes from seeking external validation for an internal experience that others cannot comprehend. Solitude, by contrast, is having a feast alone. You're completely satisfied by your own company. The richness comes not from avoiding others, but from no longer needing them to complete you. You've discovered the difference between being with people and truly connecting with them, between filling time with chatter and sharing meaningful silence. Feel this difference in your body right now. Loneliness creates a gnawing sensation, an anxious craving that seems to say, "Something is missing." It generates restless energy, the urge to reach out to fill the void with any available distraction. Solitude, however, settles in your body like warm contentment. Your breathing deepens, your shoulders relax, and you experience the rare pleasure of being completely present with yourself. This transformation reflects the ancient archetype of the hermit one, who withdraws not from hatred of the world, but from love of truth. The hermit in tarot cards carries a lantern illuminating the path not just for themselves, but for others who might follow. This withdrawal serves a sacred purpose to develop the inner clarity that can only emerge in stillness. When you no longer need external validation to feel whole, your relationships undergo a profound shift. You stop relating from need and begin relating from choice. The desperate edge disappears from your interactions. You're no longer grasping for connection or fearing abandonment. This shift often puzzles people who knew you in your needy phase, but it creates space for much more authentic relationships to emerge. The paradox is striking. The less you need from others, the more you can genuinely offer them. But this generosity often makes you even more mysterious to those still operating from scarcity. They can't understand how you can care deeply without clinging love freely, without possessing or support others, without depleting yourself. Your emotional independence threatens their worldview about how relationships should function. Authentic friendship becomes like finding someone who speaks your native language in a foreign country, rare, precious, and immediately recognizable. These connections don't require explanation or performance. There's a quality of recognition that transcends words, a mutual understanding that makes superficial relationships feel even more hollow by comparison. Pay attention to which relationships energize you and which drain you. Notice how this awareness naturally guides you toward more genuine connections while helping you release relationships built on obligation or habit. You might find that your social circle shrinks, but the quality of remaining connections deepens significantly. As Jung observed, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. This authenticity acts like a tuning fork. It resonates with others who share a similar frequency, while creating dissonance with those still operating from false personas. The people who are drawn to your authentic self aren't looking for what you can do for them. They're attracted to who you are when you're not trying to be anything at all. True relationship requires two people who are comfortable with themselves. When you've made peace with your own company, you stop trying to use others to escape yourself. You no longer seek relationships to fill emptiness or validate your worth. Instead, you relate from fullness, offering your presence as a gift rather than seeking to get your needs met. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. If anything, you may find yourself capable of deeper love than ever before. Love that doesn't demand reciprocation, understanding that doesn't require agreement, support that doesn't create dependency. But this love flows naturally from your center, rather than from a desperate attempt to connect. In this sacred solitude, you discover that the only relationship that truly matters is the one you have with yourself. And from this foundation, all authentic connections flow. But how do we navigate a world that demands conformity when our very existence has become a form of quiet rebellion? What is more revolutionary than simply being yourself in a world that profits from your confusion? This question strikes at the heart of why authentic living feels so radical in our current culture. Understanding this dynamic isn't about positioning yourself as a rebel or outsider. It's about recognizing that your simple refusal to participate in collective unconsciousness becomes a powerful force for change. When you grasp this principle, you can live authentically without the burden of trying to convince others or the exhaustion of constant resistance. Your refusal to participate in collective illusions becomes a form of spiritual resistance that operates beneath the surface of ordinary awareness. Jung understood that The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit. When you stop seeking validation through status symbols, refuse to engage in meaningless drama, or decline to participate in collective complaints, you're not just making personal choices, you're disrupting the unconscious agreements that keep entire systems functioning. Like a tuning fork that maintains its pure tone while surrounded by discordant noise, your authenticity creates ripples of clarity simply through existing. You don't need to preach or convince. Your presence alone demonstrates that another way of being is possible. People sense this difference, even when they can't articulate what makes you distinct from others who seem superficially similar. This echoes the archetypal pattern of the wise fool appearing simple while carrying profound truth, threatening the established order, not through direct confrontation, but through embodying an alternative reality. The fool's power lies not in what they say, but in what they reveal simply by being themselves in a world of performers. Your presence becomes a mirror that reflects back others' unconscious patterns, and this reflection creates discomfort that people often project back onto you. They may interpret your authenticity as judgment, your peace as superiority, or your boundaries as coldness. This isn't personal, it's a psychological defense mechanism that protects them from examining their own choices. Notice how some people's energy shifts when you're around the subtle tension that enters conversations. The forced quality that creeps into interactions, the relief they express when you leave. This isn't because you're doing anything wrong, it's because your authentic presence makes unconscious living more difficult to maintain. Their discomfort reveals the effort required to sustain their personas in your presence. The more genuine you become, the more others may try to pull you back into familiar patterns. They might reminisce about how you used to be, express concern about your changes, or create situations designed to trigger your old responses. This isn't malicious, it's their unconscious attempt to restore the familiar dynamic that made them feel more comfortable with themselves. Practice moving through social situations without trying to fit in or stand out, simply being present without agenda. This requires developing what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, remaining open to connection while staying true to yourself, showing care without losing your boundaries, engaging without compromising your authenticity. Like water that flows around obstacles without fighting them, learn to navigate social pressures without becoming rigid in opposition or collapsing into conformity. Water doesn't argue with rocks, it simply finds its natural path. Similarly, you can acknowledge others' different choices without defending your own or trying to convert them to your perspective. Jung taught that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This acceptance extends to accepting others' inability to understand your journey. You can feel compassion for their struggle without taking responsibility for their awakening. You can offer your authentic presence without attachment to how they receive it. Watch the impulse to justify your choices or explain your perspective when others question your authenticity. The need to defend your path often indicates that part of you still seeks external validation for your internal transformation. True authenticity needs no defense. It simply is what it is regardless of others' reactions. Your quiet rebellion isn't about changing the world through force or persuasion. It's about maintaining your integrity in a system designed to compromise it, staying present to truth in environments that reward pretense, and continuing to choose substance over surface, even when you're the only one making that choice. This invisible rebellion isn't about changing the world, it's about refusing to let the world change the truth of who you are. And in this refusal lies perhaps the greatest gift you can offer humanity, the living proof that another way of being is possible. Every person who chooses authenticity over approval creates a crack in the collective illusion, whether they know it or not. This impact extends far beyond your immediate circle, creating ripples that can transform entire communities over time. Understanding your unconscious influence helps you navigate solitude with purpose rather than bitterness. When you recognize that your authentic presence serves something larger than personal comfort, the isolation becomes not just bearable, but meaningful. Your journey through awakening mirrors the timeless hero's path, venturing into unknown territories of consciousness and returning transformed. This archetypal pattern operates beneath conscious awareness, giving others unconscious permission to begin their own journeys toward authenticity. You become living proof that survival is possible beyond the familiar boundaries of social conditioning. Like a lighthouse that doesn't chase ships, but simply maintains its beacon, your authentic presence guides others without force or manipulation. The light doesn't demand that ships change course, it simply provides a reference point for those ready to navigate toward clearer waters. Some vessels will ignore the signal entirely, others may notice but continue their current heading, and a few will adjust their path toward the illumination you provide. Jung understood that individuation serves both personal and collective healing. As you integrate your shadow, heal your wounds, and align with your authentic nature, you contribute to what he called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological field that connects all humanity. Your personal transformation becomes medicine for the wider community, even when that healing occurs invisibly. Your very existence as someone who doesn't desperately seek what others chase plants seeds of doubt about cultural assumptions. When people witness you finding contentment without constant achievement, validation, or stimulation, it challenges their deeply held beliefs about what's necessary for happiness. This isn't aggressive confrontation, it's gentle invitation through example. Sometimes the impact manifests as physical discomfort in others. They may feel unsettled around your peaceful presence, experiencing what Jung called the call of the self, their own deeper nature stirring in response to yours. This discomfort isn't punishment for their unconsciousness. It's their soul recognizing an alternative way of being and beginning to question current choices. Watch how your authenticity affects different generations. Children naturally gravitate toward genuine presence. They haven't yet learned to prefer performance over truth. Adolescents may feel both attracted to and threatened by your example, sensing possibility while fearing the cost of change. Adults often experience the most resistance, having invested heavily in their current identity structures. Consider the long-term implications of your example rippling through time. Young people who witness an adult living without masks develop different assumptions about what's possible in human relationships. They carry this template into their own connections, potentially breaking generational patterns of superficiality and emotional manipulation. You become part of an eternal pattern of way showers, those who venture into new territories of consciousness, so others may follow. Throughout history, individuals have paid the price of isolation to pioneer healthier ways of being human. Your contribution joins this lineage, adding your unique perspective to humanity's slow evolution toward greater awareness. Jung observed that a man who is unconscious of himself acts in a blind, instinctive way and is in addition fooled by all the illusions that arise when he sees everything that he is not conscious of in himself coming to meet him from outside as projections upon his neighbor. Your consciousness breaks this cycle, creating space for others to recognize their own projections rather than remaining trapped by them. The future you're creating extends beyond your visible influence. Every authentic interaction models different possibilities for human connection. Every boundary you maintain with grace teaches others that self-respect and kindness can coexist. Every moment you choose truth over comfort demonstrates that integrity is possible even when it's difficult. Your solitude is not selfish isolation, but a profound service to the evolution of human consciousness. Proof that wholeness is possible. So, as we conclude this exploration, the question remains, will you continue to sacrifice your truth for the comfort of belonging, or will you embrace the sacred solitude that authentic living requires? The path of awakening is not for everyone, and that's perfectly natural. But if you've felt the stirring of something deeper, the restlessness of a soul that no longer fits in old containers, then you already know your choice has been made. The isolation you experience isn't evidence of failure, it's proof of growth. When you can no longer pretend that shallow connections satisfy your deeper longing for truth, when you find yourself unable to participate in conversations that feel empty, when your very presence seems to make others uncomfortable, you're not becoming broken, you're becoming whole. Remember Jung's profound insight. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Yet in this complete self-acceptance, you become capable of the kind of love and connection that most people only dream of, relationships built on truth rather than need, presence rather than performance. Your journey doesn't require validation from those who cannot understand it. The loneliness will transform into solitude, the isolation into freedom, and the misunderstanding into clarity about who deserves access to your authentic self. If this exploration has illuminated something within you, if it has named an experience you thought was yours alone, then consider subscribing to Psyche for Life. Here we dive deep into the territories that matter most, the landscape of the human soul, and the courage required to live authentically in an inauthentic world.